Every steak explained. Few things at a backyard barbecue start more arguments than someone confidently declaring their favorite cut is the best one. Steak is one of those foods that makes otherwise reasonable people suddenly speak like sommeliers, tossing around words like marbling and reverse sear, as if they didn't just learn them from a YouTube video an hour ago. No judgment. We've all been there. This is that video. Here's the thing, though. Almost every cut of steak you've ever eaten comes from a very specific, very logical place on the animal, and the differences in flavor, tenderness, and price all trace back to one simple fact: how much work that particular muscle did during the cow's life. Muscles that work hard get tough and flavorful. Muscles that barely lift a finger or a hoof stay tender and mild. That's basically the entire steak universe in one sentence. But let's get into it properly anyway. Ribeye. The ribeye comes from the rib section, specifically the muscle that runs along the upper back, and it's famous for one reason above all others: fat. Ribeye is heavily marbled, meaning it has thin streaks of intramuscular fat running through the meat itself, and since fat carries flavor and bastes the meat from the inside as it cooks, ribeye has a reputation as the most flavorful cut on the list. The rib area does a moderate amount of work supporting the animal's frame, but isn't a primary weight-bearing or locomotion muscle, which is exactly why it stays tender despite all that marbling. It's basically the cow's version of a couch potato with excellent genetics. Filet mignon. Filet mignon is cut from the tenderloin, a long, narrow muscle that runs beneath the ribs along the spine, and it holds the honor of being the single most tender cut of beef available, for the simple reason that this muscle does almost no work at all. It's tucked away, protected by the spine and ribs, rarely engaged for movement or weight-bearing, so it never builds the tough connective tissue that gives other cuts their chew. That extreme tenderness is exactly why filet mignon is prized and priced accordingly, but it also explains why steak snobs will tell you it's a little bland on its own. Less muscle activity means less marbling, which means less of the fat that carries flavor. It's the cut equivalent of a very polite, very soft-spoken guest at a party who somehow still gets seated at the head of the table. New York strip. The strip steak comes from the short loin, right next door to the tenderloin, and it manages a genuinely nice compromise between the two extremes on this list, offering solid tenderness with noticeably more beefy flavor than filet mignon, thanks to a moderate amount of marbling and a slightly firmer texture from doing a bit more structural work. It picked up the New York name from its popularity at old-school New York steakhouses in the 19th century, back when a thick slab of strip loin and a starched white tablecloth were basically shorthand for "we have made it." T-bone and porterhouse. Here's a fun bit of butcher trivia. The T-bone and the porterhouse are technically the same cut, just cut from different points along the short loin, and both are essentially two steaks for the price of admission, joined together by that distinctive T-shaped bone. On one side sits a portion of strip steak, and on the other sits a portion of tenderloin, meaning you're getting the beefy flavor of one cut and the buttery tenderness of the other in a single sitting. The main difference is portion size, since a porterhouse is cut farther back toward the rear of the short loin, where the tenderloin section is noticeably larger, while a T-bone comes from farther forward, where that tenderloin portion is smaller. It's less a cut of meat and more a two-for-one deal that somebody accidentally left connected to a bone, and honestly, good for them. Sirloin. Sirloin comes from the primal section located just behind the short loin, closer to the rear of the animal, an area that does more actual work than the loin cuts, but considerably less than the legs. That puts sirloin in a middle tier, leaner and less tender than a ribeye or strip, but still reasonably tender and far more affordable, which has made it the reliable workhorse of home cooking for generations. Top sirloin, the more tender half of the cut, is the version you'll usually find labeled simply sirloin steak at the grocery store, while bottom sirloin tends to get sent off to become cubed steak, kebabs, or ground into something a lot less glamorous. Flank steak. Flank steak is pulled from the abdominal muscles, an area that does real structural work supporting the cow's body, which means it comes out lean, flavorful, and genuinely tough if you're not careful with it. It's long, flat, and covered in visible muscle fiber running in one clear direction, and it absolutely rewards two things: a solid marinade to help tenderize it, and slicing it thinly against the grain after cooking, which physically shortens those tough fibers so each bite doesn't feel like a workout. Treated right, flank steak is the backbone of fajitas and stir-fries everywhere. Treated wrong, it's a jaw exercise disguised as dinner. Skirt steak. Skirt steak comes from the diaphragm muscle, which, fun fact, is a muscle that never stops working for the entire life of the animal, since it's involved in breathing. That constant activity gives skirt steak an intensely beefy, almost mineral-rich flavor, along with a loose, long-grained texture. But it also means it's one of the chewier cuts on this list if it's overcooked even slightly. It's the cut traditionally used for genuine Mexican carne asada and classic fajitas, and it cooks fast over high heat, which is honestly the only way to treat a muscle that's been on the clock non-stop its entire existence. Flat iron. The flat iron is a relatively modern butchering success story, carved from the shoulder area, specifically a section that used to get tossed into the ground beef pile because it was bisected by a thick strip of tough connective tissue running straight through the middle. In the early 2000s, meat scientists at the University of Nebraska and University of Florida figured out how to properly separate that connective tissue from the muscle around it, unlocking a cut that turned out to be shockingly tender, second only to the tenderloin in some tests, at a fraction of the price. It's basically the cut equivalent of finding out the awkward middle child was secretly the most talented one the whole time. Tri-tip. Tri-tip is a small triangular cut from the bottom sirloin area, historically popular mostly in Central California, where it became the backbone of Santa Maria-style barbecue, before slowly working its way into national popularity over the last couple decades. It's lean, well-marbled for a working muscle, and has a genuinely distinct triangular shape that makes it easy to spot in a butcher case once you know what you're looking for. It occupies a nice niche as the cut that's flavorful enough for a special occasion, but affordable enough that you don't have to mentally prepare yourself before checking the receipt. Wagyu. No steak list gets through without mentioning Wagyu, a term that technically just means Japanese cow, and refers to specific cattle breeds, most famously Kuroge Washu, prized for a genetic tendency toward extreme, almost lace-like marbling that regular cattle breeds simply don't produce naturally. True Japanese Wagyu, particularly the kind graded and certified through Japan's strict A5 system, has a fat content so high it can genuinely melt at a lower temperature than regular beef, which is why a small amount goes a long way, and why it's traditionally served in small, seared portions rather than a full American-sized slab. American Wagyu, usually a cross between Wagyu and Angus cattle, offers a milder, more accessible version of that marbling at a considerably less eye-watering price. Either way, it's the cut that turns "I'll just have a small piece" into a genuine flex. Now for the part everyone secretly came here for. Which of these is actually good for you? And which one is quietly plotting against your arteries? The honest, slightly less dramatic answer is that steak health mostly comes down to two things: total fat content and portion size. And the differences between cuts are more about degree than category, since beef in general is a genuinely excellent source of complete protein, iron, zinc, and vitamin B12. That said, the fat differences between cuts are real and worth knowing. On the leaner end, sirloin, flank steak, skirt steak, and eye of round consistently come out ahead in nutritional comparisons, typically landing somewhere around 5 to 10 grams of fat per 3.5-ounce serving, with a noticeably lower percentage of that fat being the saturated kind most closely tied to raised LDL cholesterol in large-scale nutrition research. The USDA and American Heart Association both tend to point toward these leaner cuts, specifically when beef is on the menu, and cardiovascular health is a concern, which puts sirloin and flank steak in the somewhat unglamorous but genuinely deserved position of being the responsible older sibling of the steak family. On the other end sits Wagyu, particularly the fully certified Japanese A5 kind, which can carry well over 25 grams of fat in that same serving size, a meaningful chunk of it saturated, precisely because that intense marbling is the entire point of the product. Ribeye follows close behind as the most marbled of the mainstream American cuts, which is exactly why it tastes the way it does, and exactly why nutrition guidelines tend to suggest treating it as more of an occasional centerpiece than a Tuesday night regular. None of this means Wagyu is secretly dangerous or that anyone needs to panic mid-bite. But if the goal is genuinely picking the healthiest steak on a menu, the answer is almost always going to be the leaner cut sitting quietly a few lines down from the expensive one everyone's photographing for the group chat. There's also a broader debate worth mentioning honestly, the same one that shows up around red meat generally, involving organizations like the World Health Organization, which has classified red meat as a probable carcinogen in large quantities, a classification that gets a lot of headlines but deserves some real context. That classification is considerably stronger and clearer for processed meat specifically, things like bacon, sausage, and deli meat, than it is for an unprocessed cut of sirloin cooked at home. And most mainstream nutrition guidance still treats moderate portions of lean, unprocessed beef as a perfectly reasonable part of a balanced diet, particularly given how nutrient-dense it is per calorie compared to a lot of alternatives. As with the seed oil debate and the tea debate, and honestly most food debates, the loudest headline and the most accurate one rarely turn out to be the same sentence. So where does that leave you at the butcher counter? Somewhere refreshingly practical. An occasional ribeye is not a dietary crime. A regular rotation of sirloin and flank steak is a genuinely smart habit. And ordering the A5 Wagyu tasting menu every single week is more of a financial decision than a health one at that point anyway. Portion size and cooking method, grilling and roasting over deep frying in a pool of butter, probably matter more day to day than which specific cut you're staring down in the meat case. At the end of the day, every steak on this list is really just the same animal telling a different story, depending on which muscle you're slicing into. From the hard-working diaphragm that becomes skirt steak to the practically retired tenderloin that becomes filet mignon. That's the through line connecting everything here, whether it's the ribeye's marbled indulgence, the flatiron's underdog glow-up story, or the tri-tip quietly building a regional following one Santa Maria barbecue at a time. Every single cut on this list ended up on your plate through some mix of anatomy, butchery skill, and a whole lot of clever marketing. Whether that meant convincing the world a triangular sirloin scrap deserved its own name, or turning an entire national cuisine around one diaphragm muscle. Whether it's a lean flank steak sliced thin for weeknight fajitas, or a small, reverent piece of A5 Wagyu treated like it just walked the red carpet, steak covers just as much ground as tea, potatoes, rice, mushrooms, and spices ever did. People who actually learn where their dinner came from instead of just pointing at a menu tend to notice something interesting. The whole cow was working the entire time, some parts harder than others, and every single cut is just proof of exactly how hard.